Welcome to this Bipartisan Policy Center webinar, Will the Election Be Legit? How to Protect from Threats Foreign and Domestic. My name is Matthew Weil, and I direct the Elections Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. We all expected the 2020 presidential election to be an exciting one. Both parties seemed amped up and ready to get their supporters to the polls even a year ago. But there were concerns, even then, about the legitimacy of the election. Our election infrastructure was attacked just 4 years ago, and would we be ready for 2020? Would close races and misinformation divide the public into camps where one side believes the results and the other does not? Then the pandemic happened. States were forced to make rapid changes to ensure their voters could participate. In so doing, they've also opened up new vulnerabilities to the system, threats that could undermine confidence in the legitimacy of voting in America. It is in that context that we arrive at today's event, and we have a rockstar panel for you, and my job is just to ask you to submit questions into the YouTube and Facebook feed, and to introduce our moderator. Steve Scully is a senior executive producer and political editor at C-SPAN. He is one of the hosts for its morning call-in show, Washington Journal, as well as the weekly C-SPAN's podcast. He has served on the board of the White House Correspondents Association, including as its president, and Mr. Scully will be moderating the second presidential debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden on October 15th. I could spend the next 5 minutes reading more of his bio, but instead, I will turn the event over to our able moderator. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and this may be good training for the presidential debate in about 4 weeks. Let me welcome, as you said, our rockstar panel, two leaders from the Bipartisan Policy Institute. That, of course, is Donna Brazil, former acting chair of the Democratic National Committee, longtime strategist and chief campaign manager for the Al Gore 2000 campaign. And Michael Steele, the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, the former chair of the Republican National Committee, now an MSNBC contributor. And we welcome both of you. But I want to begin with the two secretaries of state. Kathy Boockvar, she is joining us from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She serves as the Pennsylvania Secretary of State. And Laurel Lee, who is joining us from Tallahassee, the state capital. She serves as the Florida Secretary of State. And yesterday we heard from Christopher Wray, the FBI director. And to use his words, he said that there is a Russian threat. He said that we need to be prepared for it. He said that it is a very active threat, in part to denigrate the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. So, Secretary Lee, let me begin with you. How concerned are you about that? And how does a state like Florida prevent something from happening?
So we're very concerned about the broad concept of attempted foreign interference in our elections. And when we talk about foreign interference, it's important to distinguish between direct efforts to interfere with or penetrate our election-related networks and efforts to manipulate behavior or belief systems by misinformation and disinformation. Because what we do to defend against and mitigate those threats is very distinct. In the realm of cybersecurity and direct threats, we've been making critical investments in our elections infrastructure around the state of Florida to ensure that we are prepared for the threats that have arisen and will continue to arise as we go forward. With respect to misinformation and efforts by our adversaries, be they foreign or domestic, to interfere with information that's out there about our elections or particular candidates, we're working very hard to encourage all Americans and all voters to be discerning consumers of information, to be critical consumers of what they see, and to really think about and look at and research information before they forward it, before they share it, before they pass that kind of information along. I know that my office, along with all of the other secretaries of state across our country, are working very hard in a joint effort to encourage voters who are looking for information about candidates or elections to seek that information from trusted sources, being their state and local election officials.
And I want to talk about some recent developments in Pennsylvania. But first, the threat, the concerns that we should have from China, Russia, or other outside actors.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your question, Steve. You want me to go ahead?
Your concern about outside actors, whether it's Russia, China, or other countries.
Absolutely. So I think as Secretary Lee mentioned, there's sort of two parts to this, and one is securing the infrastructure at all levels, and the other is fighting the misinformation, right? Because both are critically important. And one of the things that I've really loved about Pennsylvania and what we've built over the last couple of years since the 2016 attempts at breaching our infrastructure across the country was we have really strong state, federal, and local partnerships on this. And one of the things Governor Wolf did in 2018 in Pennsylvania was create an interagency work group where we are very closely collaborating with state and federal Office of Homeland Security, the state police, the National Guard, our Office of Information Technology, our Inspector General, Department of State, the Governor's Office, and we all meet regularly to make sure that we are working together hand in hand across the Commonwealth. And that's been incredibly productive at every level, as well as then coordinating with the 67 counties with whom we work very closely across Pennsylvania. So that's been great for securing the infrastructure and making sure we continually build on those security measures. And then, as Secretary Lee said, the other side of the coin is really making sure that we fight that disinformation. And I have to say that the federal and state collaborations has really strengthened during the last couple of years, and happy to serve on the EIS-GCC, which is the Election Infrastructure Subsector Government Coordinating Council. Say that 5 times fast. And it's been a great way to really make sure that we are transparently providing information that helps us continue to build and secure, at every level.
And I want to turn to the vote tabulation and what's going to happen in Florida and Pennsylvania in just a moment. But let me turn to Donna Brazil, because you, better than anyone as part of this panel, fully understood what happened in 2016. At what point did you realize the magnitude of the breach of security within the DNC from outside actors?
August 11th. I'll never forget that day, because that was the day that I received my briefing along with other members of the Democratic National Party. Where we were told about the Russian attempt to hack into our system. But by then, we knew that they had already penetrated our email system, our cloud system, and that there was a breach within our networks. And so we had to take very vigorous actions to try to remove some of the so-called spyware, ransomware that was on the system that was utilized to hack into our cloud and our other network. When I left the FBI office and after the briefing with federal officials, I said to myself, why am I getting in a cab? I should be heading to the Pentagon. But I had no idea at the time just how deeply wounded the party was as we were about to go into the final months of the 2016 election. It hampered our ability, of course, to raise money, because many of our donors, their names were part of that list that was released to the public. And remember, it wasn't just your name, Donna Brazil, it was also your address, your social security, and your date of birth, because we had substantial files on members of the public and others who had visited the White House, because part of the function, as Michael know, of a chair is that you keep list of donors, list of activists, list of organizations, and of course our voter file. So we had to make an effort, all at our cost, to trying to remediate this problem before Election Day. I want to first of all applaud the Secretaries of State, because what I'm hearing today, I didn't hear 4 years ago. I mean, I'm glad that not only have we upgraded our election systems to protect the systems from any type of foreign interference, but we also need to understand that the Russians were not just aiming their quote unquote fire through Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear. I don't know why anybody wants to play with bears. It's not like it's Winnie the Pooh, but we have to make sure that we protect our online voter registration systems, anything connected to the internet. And I agree with both Secretaries of State. It's the disinformation that we need to be worried about as we approach the 2020 campaign. disinformation, because I kept hearing things that I knew not to be true. And I finally called up to Brooklyn to the Clinton headquarters, and I said to Robbie Mook, who was the campaign manager, I said, "That's not Black Lives Matter." And he said, "How do you know, madam?" I said, "Because I'm Black." The disinformation that was out there was coming so fast, so furious, with such consistency and intensity that we just couldn't stop it. And yes, I do believe it had an impact, because some people believe that they were not registered. Some people believe that the information was truthful. And so we have to fight disinformation as often and as consistent as it will come in this election cycle.
Michael Steele, you're a former party chair. Did you ever even consider this type of a threat to the Republican Party, to the Democratic Party, to the American electorate?
That's a very good question. It is one that, to be honest, cycles sort of dictate behavior. So when I was chairman, we were in a congressional cycle. The emphasis was a lot different. The type of players who would be involved was very different than we see in a presidential cycle. But the realities of the work that a Secretary of State has to do, as these Secretaries of State will tell you, is the same. And the work does not stop, because an election is an election is an election. So all the protocols and all the processes have to be not only in top working order, but consistent across the board, whether it's a presidential or congressional cycle. But at that time, there was not something that was brought to my attention, as national chair, that this was a concern. We had, baked into our operations internally, technologies that we thought and hoped would, sort of prevent the kind of break-ins and the kind of, stealing of information or hacking of the system that would later come to pass in the 2016 cycle. So the difference between 2010 and 2016 in both political and in technological terms are light years apart. And the concerns that we saw on the ground at the time never elevated itself to the point that we would be having to put into place operationally the kinds of controls and measures that Donna Brazile had to do, and that our Secretaries of States have to do today. And I, as a board member of the BPC, I want to thank them so much for their leadership and certainly participating in this conversation, and as well as having Donna join in this effort to really educate and inform the public about what's at stake in this election, and appreciating that what was then is not necessarily now, and what we did then we have to do 10 times more of now. And these leaders are the ones who are paving that way.
Well, let me stay with you, Michael Steele, and then I want to turn to the two Secretaries of State. Put on your Lieutenant Governor hat, because I think one of the fundamental issues that every state is dealing with is a lack of funding for election security, the whole balloting process, the mail-in voting debate that we're seeing today. Politically, why is that such a challenge among the states? Michael Steele, first to you, and then we'll turn to Florida.
Yeah, I have no idea, and it shouldn't be. It really, really shouldn't be. I mean, the most fundamental thing that we do in this country is vote. Of all the things we spend money on, and we respect the 10th Amendment, that empowers our states. We know the vote rests in the hands of Secretary Boockvar and Secretary Lee. We know how the process worked. The federal role here, however, is important, and it has to be one in which they are supportive and consistently so when the states ask for the help that they need. And no more have we seen that, Steve, than right now, where the states have set out, this is what we need in order to prepare for a COVID-19 election, in order to prepare for the kind of engagement by the voters who've already indicated they fully intend to vote by mail. But even for those citizens who want to go to the polls, we have to change the way we operate and operationalize elections. And the secretaries of states know, working with boards of elections downstream, that has got to be a consistent effort. So I don't understand why the money can't be appropriated to do that. I, along as chairman of the U.S. Vote Foundation, working with a myriad of other organizations and members of Congress, particularly in the Senate, Senator Wyden, for example, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, in the legislation they put forth to put $4 billion across the 50 states so that they could ramp up and be prepared for voters to vote, regardless of whether they wanted to do it in person or vote by mail. And yet we were only able to get $400 million out of the $4 billion requested. And that money has to be stretched to help these secretaries of states help their boards of elections do what needs to be done. So, Steve, I don't understand it. And it's something that the Congress has to account for, because all of this talk about the problems on the other side of this rests with the fact that for the last 6 months, we've been saying that this accident that potentially could happen is right in front of us in terms of inability to deal with the increase in voter turnout, the increase for requests for absentee ballots. And the Congress has done nothing, and that's unfortunate at this point. So hopefully someone will find an extra chit to put in, but it's tough sledding.
And I think we can all agree that of the 12 battleground states, the two most important, Florida and Pennsylvania. So, Secretary Lee, let me give you a chance to respond to that overriding question: why politically it's so challenging, and what you need or what you hope for in this election and beyond.
Well, certainly. And we are fortunate in Florida that we have the benefit not only of federal investment that has been made in our elections over the last several years, but our state legislature also invested very significantly in our elections infrastructure in Florida. And last year in 2019, Governor DeSantis directed me to conduct a statewide review of our elections infrastructure and to partner with each one of our 67 local supervisors of elections to conduct an election-specific risk assessment at the county level to get a true picture of our strengths, our vulnerabilities, and everything that needed to be addressed prior to the 2020 presidential election cycle. And so for the first time ever, we did that, and we created that statewide picture of our infrastructure. And what we have done over the course of the last 18 months is use the dollars that we do have, both from federal and state funding, to address those critical needs, to address and mitigate all of the areas of key concern that we were able to identify around the state. The other very significant investment for us, again, our state legislature funded a cybersecurity bureau housed at the Department of State. And we use that bureau. It includes 5 cyber navigators who are employees at the Department of State that we deploy around the state of Florida to any county that needs assistance in their own IT management and their own network management. Because of course they're very differently equipped. We have some counties that are very large counties that have large staff, in-house IT staff, other counties that don't have access to the same type of resources or expertise in-house. And we wanted to ensure that every county could reach the same baseline of infrastructure, both cybersecurity and physical security, that they needed going into this election.
Secretary Boockvar, let me take this a step further. We got a question from Jose that I think directly relates to what you're dealing with in Pennsylvania. You can also respond to the earlier point about why politically it's so difficult to have the funding that you may need. But his question is there any logical reason why the mail-in votes cannot be counted as soon as they're received?
Whose definition of logic are we using? So I would say no. In my definition of logic, there's no reason. The key is there are fears that somebody's going to release results and that's going to be used to influence the election. But we all agree that there are ways to do that. There are penalties and, disincentives and, it's a crime and all those things that can directly address that without hindering the counties from getting the counting done in a prompt way. So I think this is something that it's still, and as you know, we've been advocating for months and months and months, the governor and the Department of State, for our legislature to increase. Right now, counties in Pennsylvania can't start pre-canvassing ballots until 7 a.m. on election day. And, we just passed Act 77 last fall, historic bipartisan legislation that made more change to voting rights in Pennsylvania than we've seen in over 8 decades, including, thank goodness, voting by mail for everybody without needing an excuse. And we went from, in 2016, the 2016 primary, we had about 84,000 Pennsylvanians vote absentee. In the 2020 primary, in the middle of the global pandemic surge, we had almost 1.5 million Pennsylvanians vote by mail. So the counties had to adjust to literally 17 times the volume. And thank you, Mr. Steele, for your comments about funding. This is something that, I'm very, very grateful to the federal government for the CARES Act and the HAVA election security funds that we received earlier this year. They were absolutely critical. But as Mr. Steele said, the truth is what we need in this country is continuous, sustained funding so that the states and the counties know that every year or every 2 years or every 4 years, we will receive this amount so they could plan, because things like, Albert sensors and, various cybersecurity, improvements across the country, they have annual fees. They have, regular investment that needs to be made. I mean, we all heard about, whatever deployments of upgrades need to happen, whether it's Windows or cybersecurity, other fronts. We need to be able to plan ahead, and we can't expect counties to be able to sort of quickly adjust without the knowledge of what funding they can expect some years from now. So that sort of brings it all together. But I think, the long and short of it is, logic, if we all had the same definitions of logic, I think we would see a lot more cohesion in how we prepare for effective election administration that benefits voters, candidates, and the nation as a whole.
So, Donna Brazil, if we have a record turnout on November the 3rd, which is a good thing for our democracy, and if we have a record number of mail-in ballots, which you would say is also good for our democracy, what is your biggest concern on election night that could become election week, that some say could be an election month?
It could be an election season, which means that we want to give every opportunity for voters to have their ballots counted. We want to ensure the integrity of our elections. I think the most important thing is that we encourage every American right now to make a plan to vote. Go to vote.org and check their voter registration status. This site also has useful information about when the deadlines are and so forth. I just received in the mail, if you plan to vote by mail, plan ahead. This is from the United States Post Office. I mean, I am so grateful that the post office, of course, I don't want to put my address. I don't need any more canvases coming, but they're giving me all of the steps I need right now to make a plan to vote early. Again, go to vote.org. That's a nonpartisan, bipartisan site. I have some partisan sites, but of course, I'm not here to give out all my partisan information. But we got to ensure that night. I know traditionally around 5 to 6 o'clock, exit polls start coming out. Some of them are published online. We got to ignore all of those exit polls. The last thing we need to do is to call the election before every voter has an opportunity to have his or her ballot cast as well as counted. So I think if we can just be a little patient and encourage all of our political leaders and the media to work together with our state and local officials to ensure we have an accurate count. I can tell you some nights I've been on television and I've heard, well, this city has not come in, this city. And traditionally, what localities come in on time and what localities don't come on time. When I'm sitting here listening to Florida, I know all 67 of your counties very intimately. And I know exactly how you count ballots in Florida. And I'm so pleased that Florida is putting the resources at the county level, because clearly when it comes to counting the ballots, we got to depend on the local officials. As Michael said, this is part of the 10th Amendment. We have a decentralized process in American politics. And we need to, this time around, work with our state and local officials to ensure we have an accurate count. And the media just need to chill. Michael probably have a better word than chill, but the media just need to stay out of it and allow for an accurate count.
Well, let me
not
follow up
try
and turn
to
to Michael
call
Steele.
winners and losers.
So how do the media do that, Michael Steele? And what's the responsibility of elected officials, most notably President Trump and Vice President Biden?
So, two very interesting and very important players. So on the media side, I really, want to echo and emphasize what Secretary Bookvar said and what Donna just said about, the end process here. This election is unprecedented on so many levels in so many ways. We know that already. All right, so this is not something we're going to walk into and like, oh my God, there's probably going to be very little that really surprises us on election night because we are already talking about, as Donna just mentioned, this potentially being an election season. We know we're not necessarily going to have a winner declared on election night because, if more Republicans decide to go vote in person and more Democrats do absentee or vote by mail, that right there tells you're not going to have a clear indication because, as you already noticed, Steve, there's some states that will start to count as the votes come in, and other states won't count until election day and election evening. So understand what the process is, which is, again, why I so much applaud these two secretaries and their colleagues around the country who've just tried to bring the temperature down, keep people focused, level-headed. Here are your do's and your don'ts. One of those don'ts, don't vote twice. Okay, don't vote twice. And so that is going to be important. So to the media, check the instant polling. Check I got to get this information out before as soon as a poll closes. No, you don't. We don't need the running play-by-play because we know the votes aren't coming in that way. So don't rush to try to declare a winner because if you do, you're going to be playing into a second narrative. And that second narrative is the one that a lot of us who've wargamed this say there's a real potential that the president taking the polling that comes in or the results that come in largely from red states and quite a few blue states, particularly if Democrats vote absentee and Republicans vote in person, the map could look very red at 9:00 on election night. And that's because Democratic votes haven't been counted because the majority of those votes are absentee. So the president could potentially come out and declare himself the winner. No, don't do that. Neither party, neither candidate should open their mouths except to say, we await the word from the secretaries of states and the process that is unfolding in the various states through the Board of Elections to deliver their final results. And if that takes 24 hours or if that takes 24 days, we should just wait patiently for the process to unfold because these women, along with their colleagues, know what the process requires. I trust them more than any campaign, more than any candidate, and their word is the one that matters on election day or election week or election month. So just chill, get a nice bottle of vino, get yourself a gin and tonic, sit back and just wait, all right? Because that's what's going to be required here, Steve, more than anything else is patience.
Secretary Lee, I'm going to put a very direct question on the table because we hear it a lot on this network with people calling in saying Russia, China, Iran, they can influence the vote tabulation. Can you clear up that issue? Is there any threat of outside actors influencing the tabulation of the votes?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So in Florida, we use hand-marked paper ballots, and our voting systems are never connected to the internet during the voting process. So there is not an opportunity during the voting process for something like that to occur. So I think that's an excellent question. It's a subject about which I know there is a lot of concern. To our earlier point about misinformation, we do see things all the time that talk about our voting machines connected to the internet and things like that. And it's very important for voters to know what are the details of the election system that's at play in their state, because many of these components work together to develop a layered defense strategy to prevent against those types of things. So there are certainly other areas, for example, public-facing websites where we publish unofficial election night results. There are areas on our election system more broadly that, we're of course working very hard to defend against this, but there are public-facing assets that we have that could be subject to those types of attacks. But our voting systems themselves, we have a permanent record of hand-marked paper ballots, and sometimes when I'm out and about at events like this, I will say you can't hack paper. If all else fails, we have that permanent paper hand-marked record we can return to ensure that the results that we have, the official results that we have and present, are accurate, and voters can rely upon the integrity of those results.
Let me stay with you, Secretary Lee, and then I want to go to Secretary Bookvar, because this is a question from B. Wood saying that your thoughts on modems and other connections to voting machines. What you're saying is that's not the case.
Well, we do have cellular modems that transmit unofficial election night results. The important distinction is that those modems are only used after polls have closed and voting is over and votes have been tabulated. The voting machine produces a result and a tabulation for all of the votes that have been cast there. After all of that happens, we do use modems to transmit unofficial results so that we can provide unofficial results on election night. Of course, even that specific discrete process is encrypted both directions, and we have many safeguards in place to ensure that even that process is very protected. So again, that's a great question. One thing that I always try to encourage voters who have concerns or questions about the integrity of our process, we have a number of steps that we take to ensure the integrity of our voting systems, including both pre- and post-election audits. Pre-election audits are open to the public, so any voter who has a concern or a question about how the machines operate or how we can have confidence that they're tabulating those votes correctly can actually go to their local elections office and watch that pre-election audit. So I highly encourage any voter with questions or concerns to consider doing that. Consider volunteering and working as an election worker. I think that the closer voters get to our process and the more that they learn, the higher degree of confidence they inevitably have at the outcomes that we produce.
Secretary Bookvar, what about Pennsylvania?
We have a lot in common. We not only have the same number of counties, Florida and Pennsylvania, but we have a lot of the same things going on. So we actually, Department of State 2 years ago required every one of the 67 counties to replace their old voting systems with new systems that meet the highest standards of security and accessibility. We actually created new standards in Pennsylvania for both security and accessibility, far more stringent than what the federal government requires. And every single one of those voting systems has a voter verifiable paper trail. So, and similar to what Secretary Lee was mentioning, we actually have been in the last, I think it was at the beginning of 2019, we created a statewide post-election audit work group, a combination of county election officials, Department of State, and some national experts, and developed a plan for Pennsylvania to take up our post-election audits, which have been in the election code for a long time. So we started last year. We started piloting risk limiting audits in a couple of the counties, and this summer we actually did our first statewide risk limiting audit. I'm happy to say that it confirmed the outcome of the presidential primaries on both the Democratic and Republican side. But I agree with Secretary Lee that these are the kinds of things that not only directly actually secure the election, but also give the voters confidence in the accuracy of the election. And both things are critical this year and every year. And, I've been really proud of all the counties who are, it's a lot of work, right? We keep adding things and adding things. And, like also in Florida, I was very thankful to have not only the federal dollars that we got that I referred to earlier, but we also, our state legislature worked with us to provide a $90 million bond to reimburse the counties for 60% of those voting system upgrades. So, these investments, again, are critical on every level. And, we've been very happy with the voters' reactions to knowing that we can show them that statistically, to a reasonable degree of statistical certainty, the outcome of the election was accurate. That goes a long way with confidence.
And Secretary Bookbar, let me stay with you for a moment, because the other potentially complicating factor in all of this, we are moving into the cold and flu season. We still have coronavirus. Election day is November the 3rd. So what keeps you up at night with those public health threats and the constitutional duty of Americans to vote?
I think, honestly, the disinformation and misinformation is what concerns me most. I know you were referring to the public health issues, which obviously are always a concern, but never more so this year. But we've done so much preparing for that and learned so much about how we could even do it better from having the primary on June 2nd. And, we are making sure, thank goodness again for Act 77, which gave every Pennsylvanian the right to vote by mail. And then we just had some big cases come down yesterday in Pennsylvania that helped make it even easier for eligible Pennsylvanians to vote. So yesterday, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed that Pennsylvania law permits the use of drop boxes and satellite drop-off locations for mail-in ballots, and also agreed that because of the Postal Service delays, that instead of ballots having to be received by 8 p.m. on election night, that they need to be postmarked by 8 p.m. on election day, and they can be received up to 3 days later. So those were huge steps forwards to make sure that it's even more safe and more accessible for voters in Pennsylvania. And we at the state level, the Department of State also procured masks, gloves, face shields, sneeze guards, tape for marking social distance, disinfecting spray for the systems and the tables, and hand sanitizer to make sure, we want to make sure that, whether you vote by mail, whether you vote in person early, or whether you vote in person on election day, that every method is safe, secure, and accessible. And we feel really good about that in Pennsylvania.
Donna Brazil, you also lived through Bush v. Gore. You've lived through a lot over the years. And I want to ask.
Don't tell my secrets.
My question is, what are the lessons? Because you've heard the argument, and I know you've talked about it on Fox News and Michael Steele on MSNBC, that potentially what happens on November the 3rd could be Bush v. Gore on steroids. So what are your biggest concerns? What would keep you up at night with regard to the election results this November?
Well, all of the confusion that happens in the weeks culminating with Election Day, voters don't know if they've been purged. They may have moved during this COVID pandemic. They may not know if they're still eligible to vote because they didn't check their registration status, or they go to their old precinct and it's no longer operational because of COVID, and we've reduced the number of polling sites. So I worry about those voters who are not informed and they wait to the last minute to get excited. Now we have just a handful of states with same-day registration when you can go up and cast your ballot. Of course, provisional ballots. But there's no question that to the extent we can educate people, we can provide them with information, we can assure them of the safeguards in place, the integrity of our process, that will cut down a lot of confusion going into Election Day. And of course, I also worry about the number of so-called poll workers that will be out there that are not trained, but they will also cause confusion and create some degree of chaos. So to the extent that our local election officials can be out front, out public, and providing information to the voters, to the extent that we can get timely information disseminated, accurate information to voters, All of this will cut down on confusion and the number of lawyers that we have to go through in the aftermath of our election process. Look, we do know in certain states there, an automatic recount could be triggered if we have razor thin margin. I remember 2004 as well. So 2000 wasn't the only sleepless night or week or month. It was actually a month. 2004 was a couple of sleepless nights. And of course, in 2016, we went until 2, 3 in the morning before everybody was on board, and Secretary Clinton later conceded that morning. So I stay up a lot at night anyway because I'm a night owl. But what worries me right now is just making sure that people are informed. No matter who you intend to vote for, I always tell people to vote. It is the hallmark of our democracy. It is our lifeblood. And especially now, we need to ensure that every eligible citizens get an opportunity to cast his or her ballot safely.
And Michael Steele, you've been on the ballot. You know what it's like on election day, candidates, supporters at polling booths trying to encourage their people to get out to the polls. Potentially, there could be long lines. There could be intimidation. There could be people who go and say that they're not registered to vote. So for those who cast their ballot on November the 3rd in person, what is your biggest concern?
That they don't pack an appropriate lunch or dinner because they could be there for a while. It's the former First Lady Michelle Obama said it best. Come for breakfast, stay through lunch, and prepare to have dinner, maybe even a late snack. And I think that speaks to the excitement and enthusiasm that the American voter has right now for this process. They want to participate. They want to share, to Donna's point, regardless of whether it's for Biden or for Trump. They want to share in this game. They want to be a part of it. And so everything we can do on the front end to mitigate problems, confusion, disruption on the back end, that's what I worry about. The things that we should be doing now. Because once you get to election day, the game kind of goes. I mean, these secretaries will tell you, the process rolls, and they will have done all that they could do. The campaigns will, have their folks out there with signs and banners and handing out material, and the poll workers who are inside the polling space, who are taking names and following up, the election judges that'll be in place. That process is well healed. What I worry about on election day is anyone or anything that deliberately disrupts that takes something that is probably part of the normal course of doing business, if you will, of running an election, and blowing it out of proportion, making it more than it is, and trying to create an atmosphere of confusion and fraud and disruption that particularly is geared toward dissuading voters from participation, turning them off from the process, making them get out of that line, making them go home. And so, as I said earlier, I trust these secretaries of state. I don't have a doubt in any one of them. Having been on the ballot here in Maryland many times, I know what that process is like for a candidate. I know especially what that process is like for elected officials, having served as the state's lieutenant governor. So, I trust them. I trust the process. What I don't trust are the bad actors. And that's what I've got my eyes and ears on between now and when it is officially declared that we have a winner. Because that's the part. And that's why I keep saying to America, don't get punked, right? Don't go down the rabbit hole and start believing stuff that in the back of your mind, it doesn't seem right, feel right, or sound right. Get informed, get engaged, get smart. Go to your state election board website. Donna is giving you a website to go to, vote.org. Another organization that has been around for a long time that works with every Secretary of State in the country, US votefoundation.org. There are places you can go to get informed and get intelligent. Do that. Don't believe the hype, and don't get caught up in the crazy, because that confusion could make this process that much more difficult.
And that
And
is a
Steve, let
perfect
me
segue.
add
Oh, sure.
that,
Yeah, Donna, go ahead.
I mean, I was a late disciple to Facebook. I've always been a Twitter person, but the fact is that Facebook now, uh, they are also helping to amplify this information uh, that we're trying to get out to voters. I mean, if you're on Facebook, as I am with my family, especially during storm season, and now I'm just looking that there, I can also click on a site. And Facebook has also put forward really good tools and information to disseminate to people to check their status, to know how to cast their ballots early, to know all of the various deadlines. So I want to applaud companies like Facebook. I also want to applaud companies like the Gap and PepsiCo that are giving their employees the day off. To the extent we can get corporations, we can get everyone involved and engaged, this lessens the impact of this being a partisan event and more an American event. I wish voting was a national holiday so that we can all celebrate the fact that we have the right to hire people who represent our values, and to give them an opportunity to serve this great country, as opposed to making this some exercise where we're all fighting each other. I want everybody, as I said, I want everybody to participate. And I hope we have a record turnout. I really do.
Donna, very quickly, if you could move Election Day to a Saturday or a Sunday, do you think that that would make a difference?
Of course. I mean, look, most voters struggle to get to the polls. I don't want to pick on Pennsylvania or Florida. I know both states intimately, but I knew in 2016 where they went to certain precincts in Philadelphia and the polls were not open. I mean, and people have like 30 minutes to vote before they have to get to work. And when the precincts are closing, people are coming home from work. They're in rush hour. I know people up in Boston, they live in Nashua, New Hampshire, and they couldn't get there in time because of the traffic. So yes, anything we could do to help voters cast their ballot, to help people enjoy this process. And look, I like weekend voting. We have weekend voting in Louisiana. I know we have a crazy system. I'm not going to defend it, but but we have weekend voting. It makes a huge difference to give people time to vote. That's why I support early voting. Thank you, Florida. Pennsylvania, I know things are moving, and Madam Secretary, you have made me so happy today listening to you, both Madam Secretaries, but we have to give voters more opportunities to cast their ballots, and to give them time to do so. One day is simply difficult for people who are working 2, 3 jobs to make ends meet, especially now in this pandemic.
Steve,
So let me
if I can,
Sure, go ahead, Michael.
can I jump on that real quick, Steve? Yeah, I just not only want to echo that, but I want to put down some definitive markers on that point. Not only should it be a national holiday, we should move it from November to the spring. Why we're hosting elections in the dead of winter, in some cases it's snowing, going to the polls in some parts of the country. It's cold, it's dark. It is such a great disincentive, and that works to the political apparatus. I'm not going to lie to you. They love it because they know they can get their hardcore voters out, and everybody else is kind of like, well, it's kind of cold outside. I think I'll just not do it. Move the date, make it a national holiday, do it over a weekend. There's so many ways, with the input of our secretaries of states, with the input of our boards of elections of the 50 states and our territories, that we can come to a consensus around the point that Donna made, making this something of pride, not something to dread, not something to be afraid of, not something to, be suspicious of, but something that we want to participate at a level that not only talks about American or speaks to American exceptionalism, but proves it. And so I just think we should really be aggressive on this front. Get it out of November. There's no reason to vote in the dead of night. We can do it on a bright spring weekend, summer weekend. There's so many opportunities to make this something that Americans would want to do with a sense of pride.
And can I just add one editorial note? I love New Hampshire, but I think Hawaii should be the first in the nation primary, but I'm just saying. We have about 10 minutes left. Let me turn to the two secretaries of state. Two good questions from Kathleen Regan. She wants to know, what security procedures has Florida and Pennsylvania taken to give the public confidence that their vote will be secure in the ballot? And then Katie Beckman says, how are you preparing for the possibility of a contested outcome? So 2 big questions. Secretary Lee, we'll turn to you first.
Sure. Well, I think a number of the things that we've touched on, throughout the program go to the first question. Why should voters have confidence in the integrity of our process? And we have made such critical investments over the course of the last several years in Florida. Everything from modernizing all of our voting equipment to ensuring that our cyber defenses were increased, modernized, ready to face the kinds of challenges that we face today. We've also engaged in a very robust and involved training program, not only here in the Department of State, but also out in all of our local election officials' offices to be sure that we strengthened what we refer to as our human firewall. As I understand, we can invest in the best kinds of technology and the greatest firewalls, but if we have employees who don't understand the types of dangers that are associated with things like phishing emails and the spear phishing attacks and social engineering, then we can still be made vulnerable. So we have learned so very much over the last several years, and we have worked incredibly hard to strengthen and enhance all of our elections infrastructure, both cyber and physical. So, we believe that is something that we have a great story to tell. One thing that Secretary Bookvar mentioned earlier that is also been critical, I think, for many states is the partnerships that we've developed with our federal partners and our local partners. We work every day with the FBI, with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and DHS. Both of them have been absolutely critical partners to us in ensuring that we had access to expertise and partnerships that help us have current and up-to-date relevant intelligence information, and also technological support and guidance and expertise when it was needed. And so those partnerships have been key for us, as well as the ones back down to our local elections officials. So rather than just provide them with best practices, provide them with advice and guidance, we actually have gone down to be there side by side, shoulder to shoulder with them, and make sure that they have all of the support that they need.
And for the possibility, Secretary Lee, of a contested outcome, are you prepared for that?
Oh, absolutely. One thing about Florida that makes us unique, we are a purple state. In addition to being one of our country's most populous states, we also have a population here that is very evenly divided amongst the political parties. So one thing that we are very accustomed to is the concept of close elections and recounts. Thankfully, we have a very well thought out election code. So we certainly, hope for lack of controversy and a lack of litigation and all of that, but what may, we'll be prepared to address it.
And Secretary Bookvar, in Pennsylvania, again, those 2 issues, election security, contesting the outcome, and ballot security.
Yeah, so I'll start with talking about, I think the first question involved giving voters confidence and accurate information. And so I want to give a shout out to NAS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, have really been doing a lot to make sure that we're providing trusted, accurate information and telling voters to be thinking about those issues. So, hashtag TrustedInfo 2020 has been something we've been pushing for a couple of years. DHS, I don't know if any of you saw, I guess it was last year, pre-COVID, there was the pineapple on pizza debate, which was used to illustrate how easy it is to perpetuate wrong information. And clearly pineapple does not belong on pizza. So that conversation is over. Also want to mention canivote.org, which is another source of where voters can go to get trusted info. And in Pennsylvania, you can just go to votespa.com, where we have all kinds of information about election security. We have 67 individualized web pages, one for each county, so that a voter from Tioga County in the beautiful north central Pennsylvania can go. I should mention Erie, Steve, because I know that you mentioned you were from there. You could click on the drop down for your county. You could find out what voting systems are in use in your county, how-to videos, step-by-step instructions, accessibility options. So if you're a voter with a disability, you could look on our website, to find out what you can expect when you get there, information on voting by mail, accurate information, contact information for your county. And we also not only have that website, but we also have a toll-free number, 877-VOTES-PA, that any voter can call to get information and if they speak another language, we have a lot of information. Actually, a lot of our websites also in Spanish, but if you speak a different language, you can call our toll-free number. We provide free translation services for almost any language. So we highly encourage people, if you get a robocall, if you get something that just doesn't feel right, if you see something on Twitter, for God's sakes, do not click retweet. I mean, we just have to make sure people are checking that information. So I think that mostly addresses the first question. As for the second question, again, like Florida, Pennsylvania is extremely purple state, and that's a good thing. And we are very used to contested elections, and we're used to going back and forth for many different elections on many different offices. So, I think it's part of what makes it a really nice place to live. It's not all the same. It's a very diverse, 8.5 million registered voters. So, I think we also have provisions in place for recounts. And like I mentioned earlier, we've been piloting risk limiting audits, and that really is to add a whole additional layer of confidence. So we did the first statewide pilot this summer so that we weren't doing the first one after November, but we are planning on doing another risk limiting audit statewide after the November election to make sure that we can give that added level of confidence to voters that whatever the outcome of the election is, that it will have been accurate and reflect the will of the voters.
And just to be clear on the record, I think we had some disagreement from Secretary Lee on pizza and pineapple, but we'll have to leave that for. Did you disagreed, I assume?
I do. I love pineapple on my pizza.
There you go. We only have about 3.5 minutes left, so let me do a quick round robin. And Donna Brazil, I'm going to begin with you. The title of this conversation, Will the Election Be Legitimate? Let me paraphrase that and ask you very quickly, give you about a minute, how do you make sure that the election is legitimate?
Again, make a plan to vote. Let's ensure that our local and state officials have the resources they need to count the ballots. Educate the public, inform everyone on their rights so that they understand the process before November 3rd, and encourage people to vote as safely and as quickly as possible. Once you get your ballot, get it back in, sign it, make sure you follow all of the right details, get it back in. And lastly, I just want to encourage my colleagues and friends in the media. Look, I'm a political pundit. I'm a partisan with a point of view, but when it comes to our democracy, I believe that we have to go by one rule book, and that rule book is every eligible citizen should be able to cast his or her ballot. And I hope that in the closing days and weeks of this campaign, that we can encourage all political parties, all of our national leaders, institutions, to ensure that the integrity of our process is not violated. And lastly, I know that there is an attempt by foreign governments to interfere. Let's make sure that we pay attention to the disinformation, misinformation campaigns, and to try to give people the accurate information so that they're not confused on Election Day.
In Tallahassee, Secretary Lee, same question. How do you make sure the election is legitimate?
Well, I think it has to start with extensive logistics and planning. It's followed by a contingency plan, and then I agree completely. I think one of the really key elements this year, more than ever, is going to be communicating with voters, making sure voters understand where to vote, when to vote, everything that they need to know about the options that are available to them in Florida. Any voter can vote by mail, vote early, or vote in person on Election Day. And we want to ensure that they know that we have plans in place with PPE and safety precautions. So whatever option they choose, they are going to be greeted with all of those measures designed to keep them and their families safe. So our key objective from here on out is to make sure that we communicate all of the important work that we've been doing to keep our voters and their votes safe.
Secretary Bookbar, your response.
I think it's on us. And I've been really encouraged to hear. I mean, I think the message of chill, vote and then chill, because we as Americans historically have had faith in our leaders, in our elections, in our freedoms, and that's what makes us strong. And the more we allow others to knock that down, to make us question that, we're in real trouble far beyond November 3rd. So I think we need to be doing everything. I'm so happy to have been on this panel, because it is, I hope if we can package this and get it everywhere, we need to have faith. We need to believe. And yes, for God's sakes, vote, 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 vote.
And stay chill. So let's turn to Michael Steele. We will give you, sir, the last word.
Well, as the clock has run, I think the ladies have made it very clear. And my mama's taught me a long time ago, you never come back and second guess when the lady has spoken. I think the Secretaries of State clearly demonstrated, not just through their professional competency, but by their commitment to public service, an understanding of what's at stake, why we should trust the system. This is not hard, people. Stop believing the hype. Stop believing the crazy noise. As Secretary Bookbar said, don't retweet stuff that you shouldn't be retweeting. Don't spread the confusion. That's how we reinforced our trust in the system. As I said earlier, I trust these professionals, these public servants, because they know what they're doing, and they know it as better than I do as a candidate. They know it better than I do as a political leader, as a party official. And so trust them and trust the men and women that you'll meet on Election Day, that they're going to represent the best in us and do the best job possible.
Michael Steele joining us from Maryland, Donna Brazil here in Washington, D.C., the Secretary of State from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Kathy Bookbar, she is joining us from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and Laurel Lee, who is the Secretary of State in Florida, joining us from the Capitol in Tallahassee. We thank you all for being part of this conversation. We'll turn back to Matt.
Well, thank you, Steve, for moderating a great panel, and thank you, Secretary Bookbar, for reigniting the pineapple on pizza debate. I'm sure that we're going to get plenty of commentary about that. I appreciate that. I encourage everyone, all of our viewers, to make sure you view all of BPC's upcoming events. But if you're really focused on elections, we are holding an event on September 30th. It'll be online. It'll be more of a deep dive into the Electoral College. So if you want to know more about the Electoral College, we have your answers. We'll be doing 2 more events in October before the election, and we'll be following up probably with more events to come on voting in 2020. So thank you again, and thank you to our panelists and moderator.